So I will try to do it a little bit faster, and I'll start with you. Tell us, please, what led to Oslo? How did you get to this idea of Oslo? Camp David agreements from 78 do obligate Israel to reach a self-Palestinian governance according to certain milestones and well-defined conditions. The tendency of Shimon Peres was to do that with Jordan, with King Hussein. Personally, in 1980, I brought to him a document from a Jordanian king, and I created those clandestine meetings, and we wanted to recruit the Palestinian support to certain maneuver with Jordan. In 78, we received that, and Likud rejected that. Later on, the American Secretary Schultz bothered to meet government of Israel in order to fulfill or realize your commitments, because we, for now, the Egyptians also signed those agreements, and Shamir told him no. As a result of this refusal, Schultz started negotiations with PLO, and in December of 88, he began negotiations between the United States and the PLO, and the Jordanians stepped out of this whole business. And the only way to promote this whole story was to actually see how exactly can you reach some kind of understanding with PLO. But how did we get to Oslo Accords? Paris' understanding was that one should not introduce a foreign entity into that. The whole basic understanding. He asked Rabin in January of 93, can we invite Arafat into it? And this is how we'll annul external influence. And we had, in 89, there were negotiations with Bacon Mubarak. And in July, 31st of July of 1989, we did agree, Yossi Beilin and myself, we did agreed with Faisal Husseini of the first draft, 8 from within and 2 from outside, and we will say that if it's in, it's because they were expelled. So basically, we want to talk about this delegation. We want to talk to internal delegation. So this is indeed became a Madrid conference, and then Madrid conference, there was a whole delegation in November, on 3rd of November. We began the negotiations between the Jordanian Palestinian delegation that fell apart into two. There was only the Palestinian delegation, and they wanted everything to be approved by Arafat. And behind the curtains, in fact, under the table, Rabin came to power, and the negotiations, and he promised to fulfill the self-governance within 8 to 9 months. Negotiations in Washington was in a complete dead end. It stopped completely. And then I started to talk to Abu Allah. I talked to Abu Allah, and Rabin approved again. He didn't even think that we'll find an understanding or complete arrangement. He didn't believe that I can do that. He knew me, but he didn't believe. But Rabin wanted those talks in order to reinvigorate Washington, in order to bring back to life Washington and negotiations without actually bringing 420 those who were expelled from Lebanon back. So 92, 93, the big exile into Lebanon, they sent them to Washington as a result.
And I fulfilled this. We created enough trust on the other side, in order to create that process whereby at the end of April, the Palestinians went back to Washington to have negotiations. They went to Washington without anything from Hamas. At that point, Rabin conducted the negotiations and not Paris. Okay. Excuse me, I have to be brief because we don't have too much time. We don't have a Palestinian here, so you'll be the Palestinian. What was the Palestinian logic during that time? Okay, look, in the Palestinian view, they didn't want to come. Okay. For the Palestinians, Oslo isn't an agreement, it's a process. It's a process that is is part of a broader Arab process that began, if you will, in 1967 or 1973, some would say. But let's take 1967 as a turning point, Sadat's visit here. This is a process that I call coming to terms with a Jewish existence. It begins in the Arab world. And the process that led to Oslo is basically a project of the people, of the residents in the area, not the. You have to understand that those who started the first Intifada were the people living here. After that, the center of gravity of the Palestinian struggle was transferred to the West Bank. They had the blows of Black September in Jordan. The PLO was greatly weakened, and it couldn't really lead anything. The center of gravity was shifted to the West Bank. The residents of the West Bank and they believe that with their familiarity with the Israeli side, they could create a certain change that could create a breakthrough in this game. And the truth is that what happened was that there was a very positive development after the outbreak of that Intifada, because first of all, it was different from any other all the other elements of the struggle up until there was some terror there, but the very core there, it was a popular uprising that was nonviolent. Now, what did this struggle do? It began a major dialogue with the peace camp in Israel. It spurred a lot of interest in global public opinion and the global media. All over there were teams of journalists from all over the world that came here to try to understand what's going on. And the message that came from the initiators of the Intifada was three things. First of all, we are Palestinians and not Israelis, which means that we have our own identity. We want self-determination just like you have self-determination. Two, we don't want to wipe you out. We want to set up a state beside you and side by side with you. And three, for us, the time of the violent struggle is over. In other words, to our understanding, the armed struggle is failed. So to my understanding is what they said then is that we can't beat you. Thank you. That's fine. We won't manage to get everything in. I just have one last sentence, please. The bottom line, so just one last sentence. The bottom line of what I'm trying to say here is that Arafat did not bring Oslo. Arafat was led to Oslo. He didn't lead Oslo. So the one who really made him the failure of the Oslo Accords is wrong, because he didn't see a process. He saw a person that got things messed up. You have to look at this in broader terms. Okay, great. I want to go back to you with regard to Arafat. Explain to us, to the ordinary people, what is really Oslo for Arafat? What was this agreement? What are the commitments that were there? What needs to be there?
Well, I will answer this question, of course, but again, I would like to reflect on what Yohanan just said. Again, I just want to say, and then I will get to the point of your question, I promise you. I just want to say that as someone who was there from 1989, I was present there constantly, and Intifada indeed really showed Israel how you can handle 10,000 prisoners, children that throw stones, and you have to open procedures with their parents. Detention, nothing worked, and the main threat it created was a threat upon an Israel democracy, and I'm saying it now so we can end with that later on. How can we actually be measured as a democratic state while we are oppressing the civilian uprisal, using weapons against them with unlimited force? And we need to stop it for us. And we have to stop it for our soldiers, really, because that was not an idea of confronting children. That was a part of the pressure, really. We need to understand that. And now what happened? The basic declaration in 93 of principles, Declaration of Principles, basically dictated a mechanism, a certain framework. It was a process that was rated. It was actually a gradual process. There were the general lines. There were first years as an interim period. At the first stage of the interim years of 5 years, there is a Jericho and Gaza agreement. And that's the first agreement that was actually signed in 94 that transferred that created Palestinian Authority, and Palestinian Authority received majority of Gaza besides the settlements that were still under the Israeli control, and the Jericho area. At a certain point in Jericho and the Judea and Samaria, so it won't be just Gaza. So there were authorities transferred to the Palestinian Authority. The second stage, they transferred additional civic authorities in Judea and Samaria. There were agreements. I was part of both of those agreements. No one is familiar with them, but that were called the Transition of Authority Agreement. And so no one knows about that. And there was an interim agreement, with part of which there was another additional gradual process dictated. So Palestinian Authority entered Judea and Samaria with authorities, and now they receive gradually control of other additional territories, of the certain territories. And here they divided Judea and Samaria in 3 different parts: A, C, and B. A is the Palestinian population at the first stage were transferred to the civic and security authority control of Palestinian Authority, Palestinian police, and etc. Territory B was transferred into areas that were surrounded by Palestinians, not in centers of the cities, will be under civic Palestinian ruling, but the internal security remained in the hands of Israel. And seized the white territory, 70% of the bank was this type of territory remained in security control of Israel, and all the infrastructures were under Israeli control, but Palestinians that lived there, they're very few at that point. They were not populated by Palestinians, so the civic authority was in the hands of Palestinian Authority for the Palestinians. And within there were also territories, there were also settlements that were not marked on the map. They didn't want to actually point out the borders of the settlements on the map, and this is where all the authorities remain in the hands of Israel. After the interim agreement, we did transfer A and B, and regarding C, what has been decided, there was a revision, 3 additional stages, where in 3 stages C will be transferred into B, and from C to A, and in the end of the day was supposed to remain in the hands of Israel after 3 of the stages that were supposed to last for a year and a half, each half a year. Another stage after a year and a half from interim agreement was supposed to be at the place where the hands of Israel. We had only core matters on the way to the permanent agreement: borders, settlements, Jerusalem, as security arrangements, and additional topics of water and etc. Water, no, this was not there. That's true. Water was not included into it. Yeah, it was in continuation of that. But that was the framework. What this permanent agreement within 5 years, within those 5 years, was supposed to end in May 99 from the Jericho-Gaza agreement in May 99. And during this second year, already in 96, we were supposed to start the negotiations on the permanent agreement that will discuss all of those topics. And then 4 years, 3 years of negotiations of the permanent agreement. After the interim agreement, we were supposed to implement it. That was the organizing and arranging idea, in the end of which we were supposed, no one talked about the state at that moment, but we were supposed to find ourselves with some kind of permanent agreement where we solved all the problems and reached an understanding. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to turn to you, Eli. And we've been hearing from the minister that there is no partner constantly. I want you to talk about Arafat. Is he the reason that there wasn't a partner, or did we not really manage things well with him? I think it's a bit of both. That's my answer. Look, Eyal, is the good, the bad, and the ugly. Now, for 13 years, once, twice a week, I was in the territories, and we talked more and more with the Palestinians. And the stories that we heard from Arafat were outlandish. All of his whims, all of his, when we tried to prepare the negotiations for the final status agreement, Yossi Beilin asked myself and Ron Pundak to produce a certain type of a format. Arafat called over Yossi, then he called me over and he said, don't go Don't go into a final status arrangement. The gap is too great. We have to go slowly. You can't go too far. It's not going to work. You can go slowly. And Sari Nusseibeh added, if you go fast, the pressure on the Palestinian will be too great. He didn't say that it would explode, but he said it would be too much. In 1996 up until 1999, we built a process where the Likud was in power. Netanyahu signed 3 additional agreements. Balin, Nimonovich, and Chaim Ramon sat with the Palestinians once a month or sometimes twice a month in order to finalize it, to create a safety net for the Palestinians. And that way we could advance little by little. Now, Arafat, when Barak was elected, we were prepared for this. I asked my friend Zuhair Manasseh, tell me, what is Arafat's strategy? What is Arafat's strategy? So he says to me, look, you have control of the money, control of the weapons, and there are always 2 strategies. One is good, one is violent, and one is non-violent. So we thought, we prepared 98, 99, 97. You have to have negotiations, not to say what you want. You have to have negotiations over what you can really handle. We prepared for 4 things to prepare for that. We wrote with the Palestinians how to move from the logic of war to the logic of peace. He gave the address in December 1998 in Stockholm, and verbatim what we gave him. What intelligent government? I would say that we don't agree with everything, about everything, but this is the basis for a code of conduct. How do you move from the logic of war to the logic of peace? We all want that. Finalize it so that it can't get out. The second thing that we did is that we started to negotiations between an Israeli and Palestinian team. The Palestinians led by Noel Cook on what we called economic peace. Economic Permanent Agreement, EPS. And there is, how do you give economic empowerment to the Palestinian Authority, and that would provide the infrastructure for an economy and build them a certain system that can help them. Gilad Shaar just left the room. Gilad led the Israeli team versus the Palestinian and Israeli and Jordanian teams to build a trilateral security structure for how you create trilateral security, and Gilad did a wonderful job. We basically finalized this type of an agreement before Barak reached an agreement. The 4th thing was that we did a lot of people to people. I don't want to go into all the details, but people to people was very serious in order to create an infrastructure for the legitimacy for this process. They would put Arafat within that framework, and that way you could make progress. Ultimately, Arafat proposed too late and too fast, but Arafat suggested on the 26th of September, which was far too late, give me 54% of the territory of A, B, and C altogether, and let me set up a Palestinian state. On that 54%, I'll be the president, and then we can have negotiations for 2 years. But there was a way of conducting negotiations with Arafat and putting him into a track that he couldn't veer off of. Unfortunately, this was not done. I have a problem with generals that, but everything is a per case situation. Okay, Yachan, we heard from the minister constantly that there is no partner. Abbas is a terrorist. He is financing terror. By the way, in the polls that we did with the public, and some of the public too, has this feeling that there's nobody to speak to. Abbas, is he really not a partner, or have we missed an opportunity? I think that he's a partner, and he's the best partner we've ever had in Israel. We stand to lose him. Abu Mazen. Abbas is Abu Mazen. I definitely think that we're going to, that we're going to lose him in the future. There's one fact that really stands out. All the opponents of the Oslo Accords are going into taking on Yair Arafat's personality. He's the demon. He ruined everything, and they have nothing to sell beyond that. For many years, he hasn't been around, but the blame is still being blamed on Yasser Arafat, and I think the major part of the blame, and I definitely think that he's responsible for a lot of the damage that was caused here. And who could we rely on more than Abu Mazen, who blamed him for ruining the agreement while he was the number 2 in the PLO. 2 weeks after they came to the Gaza Strip, he convened all of the heads of civil society in the Gaza Strip and said to them, guys, don't listen to what Arafat's saying. We signed very tough arrangements and understandings, and he's not fulfilling them. After he died, he kept that. Abu Mazen said himself, and he said, I was against it, and I had a big, I was really, I had a major problem with him, that the way that the Palestinians looked at this process was accepted by Abu Mazen. He signed the Oslo Accords as well, but Arafat wasn't part of that process. He looked at this process as a necessary evil that brought him here, but not as a process that could fulfill what others who had brought him there wanted to fulfill. In other words, he thought of the Oslo Accords in terms of something shameful that needs to be covered. He didn't really reveal the agreement to the public. What he did do, Abu Mazen constantly is continuing to do this. Now, I want to say something about this money. No. Our time is up.
So, just a word. We heard from the minister in a very clear manner, 100% guilt is upon the Palestinians. Is it so? So I do think there's significant part of guilt upon the shoulders of the Palestinians, there is no doubt. It definitely not 100% if you want to measure it in percentages, but I do think the Palestinians indeed would kill the Oslo Accord. And what the most damaging part, there was no doubt, was the terrorism. That would definitely beat over it. Definitely. I think the terrorism was, in fact, that what killed it in the eyes of the Israeli public, in fact. In the eyes of the public here was the whole idea was that in return for the territories will receive peace. We gave the territories to receive terrorism, but then we left Gaza and we gave territories and received missiles, and that was a harsh blow to the whole camp of peace and those who try to promote from this point. We did lose those, and the Palestinian Authority was quite corrupted, so it did manage to lose its own public. They kicked out those who actually tried to build something new, but they introduced a bit of an old corrupted lackeys of their own. And from the other hand, the Israeli, again, side did not respect the agreement in many aspects. There was a new revaluation of Territory C. It happened in the beginning. We did a bit of why. And later on, it stopped completely. So Israel, yes, did treat Territory C as an Israeli area, and it was designated to remain in the control of the Israelis and to suffocate the Palestinian Authority without being able to develop itself and to make it much harder for the Palestinian Authority to grow. And actually to reinforce the more extremist factors and the whole message that getting a bit of a compromise with Israel is worth of it because you'll gain something from it. It also disappeared. And I think Israel also made a lot of mistakes, including the topic of, in my eyes, the right destination was how to get to separation, not to continue to rule over Palestinians when there were blocks and near the Green Line, things that were actually easier to see in the future as separated areas, but intentionally completely. Certain factors that, in my opinion, ideologically speaking, do not represent the majority of Israeli public. Actually, they represent a very small minority, do everything in order to settle down in areas that will never allow such a separation. And the policy of settlements and the way it has been conducted makes it even harder to consider ever the possibility to move forward, including the everyday friction in the field itself. And I think the idea of Oslo was gradual, but these gradual steps were supposed to build trust between the sides, and at a certain point we'll reach an understanding and agreement, a permanent one. But this trust wasn't built, it actually was eroded completely and distracted, and both parties contributed a lot, really. So I really want to thank you for participation, and that was it. Yeah, unfortunately our time is very limited and it's shortened in half. But I have to say one sentence. Yeah, you all have one sentence to say, but indeed one sentence. Do not start history from the creation of the world. Just one sentence. Professor Trachtenberg just said in the beginning that we need to analyze and to look into the facts. I presented here 10 different topics for analysis in order to try to think about Oslo, whether it was a serious process. I would love you to, if it's possible, to create a small, thick group with people maybe from abroad, as people to compare it to other places as well. And we will be going through those 10 topics in a very serious, continuous discussion, not in a split second. We need a serious discussion about each of those topics, really, and I'll be very grateful. It's a good idea, really. 2 sentences I have, actually, in fact. One and a half. One, I would like to remind you that the Palestinian claim that is constantly present here since the Oslo Accord until today is that the biggest failure of this process was in the very fact that they gave up in the claim they presented as a delegation in Washington, and Arafat gave it up, that Israel will take upon itself a commitment to evacuate the settlements. That it's not possible to have any settlement with settlements, whether it's true or not. This is something else. That's true. That's what happened then, in fact. But again, that was the claim. Yair again. Secondly, I would like to say that 14 years already, it's almost half of the 30 years that there is a right-wing government that controls Israel, and there is almost a ban. It's not a formal prohibition, obviously, of conversations with the other side. We will never reach anything if one cannot talk to other party. The reality today that any conversation is almost prohibited, in fact. So we will continue to live in this situation if no any change would happen on our behalf. And Rina, would you like to add one sentence, one and a half? So it's very difficult to reach a settlement and agreement. Jerusalem is a very difficult one. Obviously, settlements are also quite a challenge. But we do need to aspire towards the separation from the Palestinians. Continuation of control of the Palestinians cost us of what we actually see right now in Israel. This is the price we're paying of a democracy that is falling apart. You cannot align those things all the time. It's very much related. Thank you, Pnina. There was one sentence. Thank you, Yohanan. And thank you, Yair. Thank you again. And you are taking the reins now, Gilly.